Ladies and gentlemen, Liz Crandall.
What's up, everyone? I'm Liz, and you know, I've been feeling rather nostalgic recently, so I figured I'd tell you some stories about what it was like growing up Irish Catholic outside of Boston. It's not as bad as you might think based off that intro. But so I grew up Irish Catholic. That meant that I went to Catholic school for most of my young life. And when you go to Catholic school, you are mandated to go to confession, which is when you go in front of a priest and you say, "Hi, I'm 7 years old, and here's everything I've ever done wrong, and I hope this doesn't give me a complex." And he says, say 10 Hail Marys and be on your way. You're healed, you're saved. And so I think that going to confession is a lot like going to see a mall Santa when you're a kid, because you go, it's this old guy, he's like, I work for the big man. And then he says, hey, you've been naughty or nice? And you answer, maybe honestly, maybe not. And maybe your parents should be supervising in both circumstances, but for some reason they're really not. Don't know what the deal is with that. But so when I was a kid, I went to confession and I was really worried that if my sins weren't cool enough, that the priest would think I was lame and had no friends. So I did what any person would do when they're a kid and they're nervous like that, and I just started to lie to the priest. And so they started off as like tiny little things. I'd be like, stole a cookie from the lunchroom today. It was delicious, I feel no shame. Or I'd be like, last night, snuck downstairs, played my brother's super violent video game Call of Duty Zombies. Cool, feel no shame. And then I got really, really deep into it, and I eventually confessed to the Aaron Hernandez murders. Really cool, feel no shame. But I do think that might have been when the priest started to catch on to what I'd been doing. But the other thing about being raised Catholic is that no one really ever takes the time to explain to you the birds and the bees because they don't want to tarnish your young mind with truth and science. So my mom would tell me when I was a kid that I was a miracle baby, and when you don't understand the birds and the bees and you're told that you're a miracle baby, you assume the only reasonable thing that you can think to assume, which is that you must be the second coming of Jesus Christ. Which I was. And that was a big weight for me to carry at that young age. You know, I walked around being terrified that I wasn't leading with a good enough example. I was throwing the first stones. I had a hard time making friends because I was just really scared one of them was gonna Judas me. And eventually I sat my mom down and I talked to her and I was like, hey mom, can I just ask if you're gonna be okay when I have to get crucified? Like, are you going to be able to handle that? Should we put you in therapy? Like, as a mother, I'm sure that would be really hard. I heard Mary took it hard too. And she looked at me like I was a crazy person, which I was. And then I had a second question, so I followed up. And I said, hey mom, also, when God came down to you in a dream, was it kind of like ghostly, or was it more like you knew it was God and it wasn't a dream? Did he tell you that, like, you know, you're gonna raise the next child of God, that you're a saint now? Or was he more like, we gotta do it again, woke style, Ocean's 8, think the new Ghostbusters? And then, you know, after she, I think, processed what it was that I was saying to her, she sat me down and did explain to me general human anatomy. And that was the day I lost my innocence and became an atheist and came out as bisexual. I finally got that off my chest. That was great. But no, I think a lot about what it would have been to have been brought up as like a different religion. And I think a lot about what I would have done if I was a Jewish kid, and what my parents would have done if they had to explain to me what Santa Claus was. Because I think there's kind of like really only two angles you can do with this. One being that you sit your kid down and you say, hey, most of the world is Christian, and they, once a year in the wintertime, decide to gaslight their children into believing that there is this really old guy who lives in the North Pole, and that he breaks into their house once a year, gives them gifts, eats their cookies, drinks their milk, and then is also watching them 100% of the time, day or night. Or you could do the much simpler thing, and you could say, hey, there's this Santa Claus guy, pretty anti-Semitic. He's not going to give you a single thing. Because if I was a Jewish parent, I wouldn't want to be the parent that had a kid who ruined it for another kid. Like, well, my own parents ruined Santa Claus for me, right? Because I was getting too old. I was about 13 when I had suspicions, and then I was about 14 when I finally figured it out. And that was because one Christmas, Santa Claus gave me a copy of the 1984 movie, The Gremlins. If you've seen it, you might be ahead of me here. And in this movie, It's like a holiday, but also horror movie. It's really great. You should watch it. Not with your children. In this movie, there's a sequence where a girl explains how her father passed away. And she says that it was Christmas Eve and her father had dressed up like Santa Claus and was sneaking down the chimney to come surprise their family. And that he got stuck in the chimney and that they had thought that their dad had abandoned them, right? And so then she explains that, you know, a couple weeks later they were having a fire and something smelled weird. So they called the fire department and they pulled her dad out of the chimney wearing a Santa Claus costume. And at the end of this really traumatic and long monologue, she goes, and that's how I found out Santa Claus wasn't real. And she like looks off screen. And that's how I found out that Santa Claus wasn't real. And it was a gift that Santa had given me, so I got the memo, you know what I mean? But that was the day that I decided, hey, I don't believe in Santa Claus anymore, but I think I'm gonna be a film major because I wanna permanently bankrupt my parents for this. Thank you guys, have a great night. My name is Liz Crandall, thank you for having me on.